You think you know Joseph Stalin, the portraits, the parades, the iron mask of certainty. But the photographs lie. They show a monument, not a man. I was the man behind the man, his assistant, his shadow, his witness. For 15 years I carried his papers, his secrets, his sins, close enough to smell the smoke, far enough to survive it. He studied maps like a surgeon tracing veins before a cut. He could erase a border or a life with a single stroke. He fed on loyalty and starved on solitude. When he died, the radios went silent. The generals froze. Crowds filled the boulevards beneath a bruised March sky, weeping not for the man, but for the habit of fear. Ashes became history. Smoke became memory. Before we begin, if you truly enjoy these stories, hitting like or subscribe helps me keep making them, and hopefully helps you keep drifting off. Let me know where you're listening from tonight. I'm always amazed by the places people tune in. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath in, and let it out. Because once this story begins, chances are you'll be asleep before it ends. You arrive in Moscow on a night thick with coal smoke and drifting snow. The city exhales through iron chimneys, each one glowing faintly, like the end of a cigarette in the dark. Your boots scrape against the icy cobblestones as you pass through the Kremlin gates. The guards do not speak. They only nod their heads, eyes blank behind frost-bitten lashes. Inside, the corridors shine like wet stone, echoing with the sound of distant typewriters. A single light burns at the end of the hall. You walk toward it, carrying the leather folder that marks you as new. The door is half open. Inside, he waits. Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, General Secretary of the Communist Party, Chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, and the undisputed ruler of the Soviet Union. He does not look up as you enter. He is studying a map of Europe spread across his desk, its borders glowing under the green shade of a single lamp. It is August 23rd, 1939. In a few hours, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact will be signed, a treaty of friendship with Nazi Germany, publicly a promise of peace, privately a secret agreement to carve Poland in half. The German ambassador, Joachim von Ribbentrop, waits near the window, stiff in his uniform, steam rising from his breath in the cold. Stalin finally looks up. He smiles the way a chess player smiles before making a move he knows cannot be countered. He raises a glass of Georgian wine. Tsar Mir, he says, to peace. The room laughs on command. You do too, though the taste in your mouth is iron. The pact will shock the world, but here, under the vaulted ceilings of the Kremlin, it feels like inevitability. He gestures for you to step forward. You hand him the folder, signed communiques, draft orders, a telegram from Molotov waiting for approval. Stalin signs without reading. His handwriting is small and neat, as if afraid to reveal emotion even to the page. "You're new," he says at last, his accent still carrying the soft edges of Georgia. You nod. He nods back, barely perceptible, as though granting permission for your continued existence. He returns to the map. Thin pencils mark the Polish border, red lines slicing forests and towns you've never heard of. You notice how calm he looks. Not triumphant, not proud, simply certain. The certainty of a man who has outlived every rival. Tomorrow, the newspapers will call him a genius of diplomacy. Tonight, he is merely quiet. He taps the ash from his pipe into a crystal tray, then says without turning, "You will learn quickly, comrade." Or not at all. You answer, "Yes, comrade Stalin." The words sound rehearsed, as if someone else is speaking through you. He does not reply. He is already thinking ahead, past the ink still drying, toward the next betrayal. Outside, the bells of Moscow strike midnight. Inside, history shifts quietly on its hinges, and you, the newest shadow in the room, begin to understand what it means to serve him. He sends you home just before dawn. The sky above the Moskva River glows with the pale smoke of factories waking. You walk alone through Red Square, past the frozen spires of St. Basil's Cathedral. The cobblestones gleam with frost, each one reflecting the stars like shards of glass. Behind you, inside the Kremlin walls, his light still burns. He never sleeps before 3, sometimes not at all. They say he dreams better when the rest of the country is awake. In the weeks that follow, you learn the unspoken rituals. He eats late, around midnight. He prefers simple food, pickled cucumbers, black bread, and tea so strong it could raise the dead. You learn to keep your footsteps soft. No one interrupts him when he paces. Sometimes, between dictations, he tells stories of Georgia, of orchards near Gori, of the smell of pomegranates split in the sun. His voice warms for a moment, then the mask returns. You realize that nostalgia is a privilege even he rarely allows himself. When the older aides whisper in the corridors, their voices lower to a reverent murmur. They speak of how he came to power, how a boy named Iosif Jugashvili, born in 1878 in a small Georgian town, was meant for the priesthood. He studied in the Tiflis Theological Seminary, and somewhere between prayers he found marks. They say he walked out carrying both the Bible and a pamphlet and never looked back. Under the name Koba, he robbed banks for the revolution, organized strikes, and escaped Siberian exile not once, but 5 times. When Lenin's uprising triumphed in 1917, he was already the quiet one in the background, taking notes while others gave speeches. By 1922, he became General Secretary, a title no one envied because it sounded dull, administrative. But dull power lasts longer than fiery power. He used files instead of guns, assignments instead of assassinations, at first. After Lenin's death in 1924, the funeral photographs tell the rest. Stalin standing closest to the coffin, Trotsky conveniently absent, a hand raised not in mourning, but possession. Within years, Trotsky was exiled, Bukharin condemned, Zinoviev and Kamenev erased from every frame. The revolution devoured its fathers, and Stalin alone remained at the table. You hear fragments of those years in quiet conversation, the 5-year plans, the famine in Ukraine, the factories rising from mud while villages starved, the purges of 1936 to 1938, when generals confessed to impossible crimes, when poets disappeared at dusk. Every one of your colleagues has lost someone. No one mentions names. Names are dangerous things. Now, as 1939 closes, he stands unchallenged. The gulags are full, the fields sown with fear, and yet the factories hum with a rhythm that feels like progress. He has built an empire of contradiction, modernity on the bones of the old world. At meetings, he quotes Lenin as scripture, then corrects Lenin with a smile. His memory is perfect, his silences longer than speeches. He keeps a small bronze bust of himself on his desk, not from vanity, but as if to remind the real man what the myth requires. One night, you stay later than usual, copying orders long past curfew. Through the cracked door, you glimpse him reading a worn book of poetry. Pushkin, you think. And for a moment the rhythm of the words seems to calm him. Then he closes it, and the calm dies. He calls for Beria, head of the secret police. They speak in low voices about troop movements in the east, about the Germans in Poland, about allies who cannot be trusted. When Beria leaves, Stalin leans back and mutters, "History has no heart, only direction." You write the phrase down without thinking. You will learn to record everything he says, every glance, every hesitation, because one day someone will ask what it was like to stand so close to power. But no one ever truly stands close to him. Everyone stands below. Outside, the city prepares for a war it does not yet believe will come. Inside, his shadow grows longer across the maps of Europe. You extinguish the lamp, close the folder, and whisper the only prayer that still feels safe in this building: to be forgotten. The winter does not end that year. It drags into 1940, grey, frozen, and watchful. You find yourself summoned again, this time not to witness signatures, but to watch an army stumble through the snow. Finland has become the proving ground for Stalin's dreams and fears alike. The world calls it the Winter War. Inside the Kremlin, it feels like the beginning of something colder still. The winter does not end that year. It stretches forward into 1940, a season so long that even the Kremlin clocks seem to slow in protest. Moscow is a world of ice and whispers, and every whisper has your name in it. The man you serve no longer smiles. He speaks less, smokes more, and the smoke hangs in his office like an unspoken threat. The cold is no longer just outside. It has entered the heart of power. Finland, The word alone is enough to tighten the room. What began in November as a simple correction of borders has turned into a humiliation. The newspapers promised a swift march to Helsinki, maps already printed in red. But now, 4 months later, that red line bleeds backward. Each new report drips like melted ice, and the room grows quieter every day. Each morning, you walk the corridors of the Kremlin carrying folders of reports from the front. Losses phrased as numbers, names reduced to initials, entire divisions hidden behind euphemisms. You lay them on his desk, and he reads in silence. Sometimes he underlines a figure with his pencil. Sometimes he says nothing at all. The silence between his sentences is where judgment lives, and everyone learns to breathe more carefully. Outside his office, you can feel the fear spreading through the ranks. Men salute too quickly now. Secretaries burn drafts instead of filing them. The corridors smell of tobacco, ink, and panic. The Great Purge ended 2 years ago, but the memory of it walks here still. Every footstep echoes like a question no one dares ask, and every answer sounds rehearsed. The whole building seems to hold its breath. In December, he calls a midnight meeting of the General Staff. You stand near the door, taking notes as snow drifts against the windows. The generals argue about artillery, about winter gear, about morale. He listens, pipe in hand, face unreadable. Then he says quietly, "Finland will fall." It has no choice. The sentence lands like an order from physics itself. No one responds. You realize silence has become the language of survival. That night, you walk home past Red Square. Posters flutter against the frost. They show brave Soviet soldiers smiling in the snow, bayonets glinting like sunlight. You know those smiles were painted in a studio. But you keep walking because the only safe opinion in Moscow is silence. Even the snow seems afraid to fall too loudly. By January, rumors reach the city, thousands frozen in their trenches, tanks immobilized by ice thicker than steel. The Finns, few but cunning, slide through the forests on skis, setting ambushes like invisible teeth. They call it the Mannerheim Line, a wall of snow and stubbornness. The soldiers whisper of trees that shoot back and of snow that kills. The Western press mocks the Soviet army. Cartoons appear in foreign newspapers showing Stalin soldiers lost in blizzards, chasing shadows with broken rifles. He sees these clippings. He does not laugh. He circles one headline in red ink. The red giant stumbles and leaves it pinned to his wall like a wound. The laughter of the world only sharpens his need to be feared again. You spend nights helping Molotov draft new communiques. Officially, the war is going well. The soldiers are heroes. The Finnish government is collapsing. Each statement feels heavier in your hands as you type it on the old Underwood machine. The keys stick in the cold. Sometimes you think they resist the lies. You start pressing them harder as if force could make truth appear. Beria appears more often now, his coat dusted with snow, his eyes with calculation. He whispers to Stalin about spies, traitors, saboteurs. The word traitor has become elastic. It stretches to fit anyone who hesitates. He offers lists. Stalin reads them, then folds them carefully into his pocket as though they were poems. Every list is a stanza of terror, and he never misquotes himself. The next morning, you hear that 2 generals have been arrested. Their faces vanish from the group photograph in the hallway. A new print appears overnight, cropped tighter, neater. Even the air feels retouched. You start wondering how history will crop you too. February arrives with a sound like cracking glass. The Red Army finally breaks through the Finnish defenses, not by genius, but by sheer numbers and cold endurance. He takes credit for the strategy. He always does. You wonder if he believes it himself, that victory is proof of foresight, not of sacrifice. The city begins to thaw, but faith does not. When the armistice comes in March 1940, Moscow erupts in celebration. Banners unfurl, factories blow their whistles. Radio announcers call it a glorious demonstration of Soviet strength, but no one mentions the price. At least 100,000 Soviet soldiers lie frozen under the ice. You can feel them in the silence between broadcasts. Victory sounds different when it echoes through graves. That evening, he holds a small dinner in the conference hall. Pickled cabbage, dark bread, a roast goose flown in from Georgia. He toasts the victory with vodka. History, he says, forgives the living. Then he sets down the glass and studies you with a faint smile that could mean anything. The warmth of the vodka does not reach your hands. After the others leave, you linger to collect papers from the table. He is standing by the map again, moving small flags with the tip of his pipe. The red ones mark the new border with Finland, the blue ones, Germany. He stops, leans closer, and says almost to himself, "They will test us soon, but they will find we are ready." The words settle into the room, like frost returning to the glass. You nod, because nodding is safer than silence. He dismisses you with a wave, and you walk into the corridor where the bulbs buzz faintly like trapped flies. Your breath fogs the air. You can still hear his voice behind the door, low, steady, speaking to someone who is no longer in the room. Each echo follows you down the hallway until it becomes your own. Outside, the thaw begins. The river cracks and the snow retreats in slow surrender. Moscow smells of mud and kerosene again. The war in Finland is over, but you sense that something larger has shifted, a gravity pulling east and west, both toward disaster. He feels it too. He has begun sleeping less, meeting with Molotov more, and watching the western border with a hunter's patience. Spring will not bring peace, only motion. You return home one morning and find the first newspaper mentioning Germany's movement into Norway. The headlines call it bold, efficient, inevitable. The next pages show his photograph, Stalin, smiling faintly under the caption, Guardian of Soviet Peace. You stare at that picture a long time until the ink smudges under your thumb. Peace has begun to sound like another word for waiting, waiting for the storm. Everyone feels coming. That night, when you finally blow out the lamp, the darkness feels heavier than before. The Kremlin is quiet. The air outside smells of thawing earth and gunpowder. And though it is still early in the year, you already know 1940 will not be remembered for its peace. It will be remembered for how close the fire had come and how few realized the smoke had already reached their door. Chapter 3, Barbarossa and the Collapse, 1941. Spring arrives, but it brings no peace. The snow melts into mud, and trains full of soldiers thunder westward through Moscow's outskirts. You stand at the platform, watching them go, faces pressed to windows, rifles stacked like firewood. The newspapers call it preparation. You call it waiting. The city vibrates with a quiet dread that no one names. He seems calm, too calm. Meetings run late into the night. The German ambassador still visits the Kremlin, still smiles, still drinks Georgian wine. On paper, the non-aggression pact holds, but on the maps, you see the truth. German troops massing near the western border, columns of armor glinting under spring sun. He looks at those maps every night and says, "They are not fools enough to attack us." And everyone nods, because disagreement can still be fatal. You remember his words from years earlier. A single death is a tragedy. A million is a statistic. Now, the statistics are marching toward him. Every figure on his wall is becoming a man about to die. On the morning of June 22nd, 1941, the telephones begin ringing before dawn. First one line, then another, then all of them. The operator shouts for you to come at once. You arrive at the Kremlin to find the corridors full of messengers, their faces drained of color. Someone says the Luftwaffe is bombing Minsk. Another says Kiev. Another says Leningrad. No one knows which is true. All of them are. When he appears, he looks smaller somehow. The same coat, the same boots, but a different gravity. He walks to the map room and stares at the Western Front. Barbarossa, he mutters, as though saying the name aloud might unmake it. The invasion he had convinced himself would never come is already devouring half his army. You hand him a report from General Zhukov. He doesn't read it. He just sits down, hands trembling, and says, "It cannot be." The sentence hangs there, trembling with him. For the next 3 days, he vanishes. No orders, no appearances, no speeches. Beria and Molotov pace the corridors like ghosts, waiting for direction that never comes. The city holds its breath. Some say he fled Moscow, others say he's dead. You know, neither is true. He's at his dacha outside the city, alone with his fear. On the fourth day, you're summoned. He sits by the window, unshaven, a blanket over his shoulders. He doesn't look at you when he speaks. Hitler has deceived us, he says softly. Then louder, he has deceived us all. For a long time, he says nothing else. Then suddenly, he rises and throws the blanket aside. Enough. If they want war, they will have it. The silence after the outburst feels almost holy. Back in the Kremlin, he regains his shape like iron cooling into form. He orders the creation of the State Defense Committee, takes command of the armed forces himself. You watch him shed despair like a skin. He dictates his first speech to the nation, his voice steadier than his hands. This war is not for the life of our state alone. It is for all humanity. You hear those words echo across Moscow that night, and for the first time since June began, the city breathes again. The echo feels like a pulse returning to a dying body. But the front collapses. Millions of Soviet soldiers are captured in the first months. Entire armies vanish without orders, without ammunition, without food. The Wehrmacht advances faster than any map can track. Minsk falls. Smolensk follows. By autumn, the enemy is less than 200 miles from Moscow. Refugees clog the railways. You see mothers holding children wrapped in curtains, their homes already gone. The air itself seems to flee the city. Inside the Kremlin bunker, the air smells of cigarettes and wet wool. He barely sleeps. He spends nights bent over maps with Zhukov and Shaposhnikov, moving small red flags that mark divisions long destroyed. Each dawn you bring him tea. Sometimes he drinks it. Sometimes he doesn't notice you're there. His eyes are ringed with grey, but the voice remains cold, precise, unforgiving. He demands reports of officers shot for retreating. He signs execution lists with a steady hand. Every order feels like a heartbeat, keeping the war alive. Still, beneath that cruelty, you see fear. Not fear of defeat, but of being remembered as the man who lost Russia. He cannot allow that. So he does what he always does. He rewrites the story before it's finished. He orders new propaganda posters, paintings of Moscow citizens digging trenches, of women with rifles, of workers forging tanks from scrap metal. If the army fails, the people will take its place. In his mind, the line between survival and legend is paper thin. By October, the city is a fortress. Barricades rise on every street. The subway stations become bomb shelters. You move underground with him into a warren of concrete and steel. Outside, air raid sirens wail every night. The ground trembles with distant thunder. When the first snow falls, you almost weep with relief. The German advance slows. Winter has always been Russia's last ally, and Moscow breathes again, but shallowly. Then comes the order to evacuate the government to Kuibyshev. Beria begs him to go. Molotov insists it's safer. He shakes his head. I will stay in Moscow. If I leave, they will leave. If I stay, they will stay. No one argues again. Courage and pride have become the same thing. The Germans reach the city's outskirts in December. You can hear artillery from the Kremlin windows. He lights his pipe, sits beside the radio, and waits for news from Zhukov's counterattack. When it comes, it is better than hope. The Red Army has struck back, driving the Germans from the gates of Moscow. You see him exhale, a long, heavy breath, half disbelief, half rebirth. For the first time in months, the night feels survivable. That night, he gives another address. You stand in the shadows of the recording room, listening as his voice fills the air. Comrades, our cause is just. The enemy will be destroyed. It isn't just a speech, it's a resurrection. The same man who froze in terror at the first bombs now sounds immortal. You realize what he's done. He has turned panic into legend, defeat into defiance, fear into faith. The sound of his voice becomes its own artillery. Afterward, he sits alone for a long time. You watch him through the glass, the glow of a single lamp catching the smoke from his pipe. On the table before him lies a map of the Soviet Union, creased, torn, spotted with ash. He traces the edge of Moscow with his finger, then looks up, eyes glassy but alive. When he finally speaks, his voice is soft. This is not over, he says. It has only begun. The words sound less like hope than prophecy. You leave him there, the bunker humming with the sound of typewriters and telegraphs. Outside, the city sleeps under snow and searchlights. You think of the millions already gone, of the millions more who will follow. And yet, for the first time, you sense that the war will not kill him. It will make him eternal. He has found his war, and he will never let it go. The world outside freezes, but he has just begun to burn. Winter loosens its grip on Moscow, but the war does not. Factories thunder without rest, forging tanks from scrap, shells from church bells. The air tastes of iron and smoke. You can no longer tell the hour by daylight. The sun and the searchlights feel the same. He has begun to live inside maps. They cover the walls, the tables, even his ashtrays. Thin red strings mark rail lines. Blue pins mark what is left of the Volga. When you enter with reports, he rarely looks up. Sit, he says, without turning. Then he asks how many men retreated this week. By midsummer, he has an answer for a retreat itself. Order number 227. You are the one who types it. Each word feels heavier than the keys that strike it. Not one step back. Those who flee will be shot by their own comrades. Behind every regiment, new detachments will stand with machine guns pointed inward. When you finish typing, your hands are trembling. He takes the paper, reads it once, and signs without hesitation. The order goes out across the Union like thunder. You can almost feel it, traveling through telegraph wires, into barracks, into trenches, into the hearts of men who will now fear their own shadows. That night, you dream of walls closing in from both sides, front and rear, and no ground left to stand on. He says, cruelty is clarity. Mercy confuses soldiers, he tells Zhukov. Zhukov doesn't answer. He has learned that silence is its own uniform. Later you hear them arguing in low voices, the sound of strategy wrapped in rage. You wonder which of them truly commands the war, the man giving orders, or the one obeying them too well. Summer 1942. The Germans push toward the Caucasus and the Volga. Oil, grain, the river, everything that feeds the Soviet heart. He marks a single city on the map and circles it twice. Stalingrad, his city, he calls it the hinge of the war. He says, if they take it, they take me. You begin living on 4 hours of sleep. Telegram after telegram arrives from the south. Reports of shelling, of the river running red, of factories still working under fire. He listens to every message like a confession. Sometimes he swears softly in Georgian, a language that sounds like stones falling down a hill. The bunker fills with the smell of dust and cordite. You bring him tea that grows cold before he drinks it. Vodka replaces sleep. Cigarettes replace air. He reads casualty lists aloud, pausing only to correct grammar. The rhythm of death has become administrative. One evening, he surprises you. He asks if you believe in destiny. You hesitate, then say, I believe in orders. He smiles, the first in months, and replies, good. Then you understand history. At Stalingrad, the battle becomes less a fight than an act of erasure. Blocks are won and lost 10 times in a week. Factories become fortresses. Men fight among lathes and conveyor belts, their bayonets striking sparks from steel. You read the dispatches aloud while he eats in silence, each report another mouthful of ash. When the Germans reach the Volga, he stops eating altogether. For 3 days, he does not leave the map room. You hear him mutter to himself, they will drown there. They must drown there. He says it not as hope, but as a command to the universe. You glimpse the human beneath the iron only once. It is late September, and he falls asleep at the table. His head rests on his arm, pipe still in his hand. You see the age in his face, the lines carved by paranoia and sleepless nights. You drape a coat over his shoulders. He wakes and says, without opening his eyes, even gods must rest. October brings frost again. German tanks bogged down in frozen mud. The Red Army claws back street by street. In the ruins of the tractor factory, a Soviet sniper kills a general from 200 meters. The report reaches the Kremlin. He laughs for the first time in weeks. A good worker, he says, always finds his target. Then comes his order for the counter-encirclement, Operation Uranus. You watch him trace the pincer movement on the map. 2 red lines closing around the Sixth Army like jaws. He taps the point of intersection. Here, he says, here we shall bury them. When the trap closes in November, he does not cheer. He lights his pipe, stares at the smoke, and says only, "They are learning fear." You think he means the Germans, but later you realize he meant everyone. The winter of 1942 is colder than the last. Trains arrive full of wounded, leave full of bodies. Still he works, hour after hour, his desk piled with dispatches and unopened letters. One night, he asks about your family. You tell him your wife and son were evacuated east. He nods. Good. War spares no one near it. Sometimes, in the silence between reports, you catch him staring at nothing, as if listening to voices that no longer exist. The ghosts of his old comrades, perhaps, or the thousands shot for doubt. You will never know. He carries them all like medals beneath his ribs. By December, you realize he has stopped talking about victory. Now, he speaks only of endurance. Patience, he says, is stronger than bullets. Outside, snow falls again on the ruined city that bears his name. Inside the Kremlin, you feel the same frost settle in your bones. That night, you file the final reports of the year. The last sentence reads, "Enemy contained on the Volga." He signs it, sets down his pen, and says quietly, "They came to take Stalingrad. Instead, they will stay forever." You step outside for air. The bells of Moscow are silent, their bronze melted for shells. Above the Kremlin spires, the sky glows red with reflected fire. Somewhere beyond that horizon, men freeze in the ruins he refuses to surrender. And you understand now, this is not his city. It is his reflection, hard, endless, and willing to destroy itself to survive. He calls it by his own name, as if daring the world to take it. The new year arrives without joy. There are no fireworks, no bells, no toasts. Only the distant thunder of artillery rolling across the frozen river. You stand outside the Kremlin bunker and think that even the stars have learned to hide. The reports arrive one after another, each one colder than the last. The German Sixth Army is encircled, trapped inside the ruins of a city that now belongs to no one. He calls it poetic justice. Let them starve where they tried to conquer. January brings word of Paulus surrendering. A German field marshal captured alive, something Hitler swore would never happen. When Stalin hears this, he only smiles and says, he will live longer than his Führer. You carry the message into the press room. The typists burst into applause, then into tears. For the first time since the war began, victory feels real. The radio declares it, the greatest triumph of the motherland. He simply says, it was inevitable. But the cost is unspeakable. 2 million dead, a city turned to dust. Even victory smells like smoke. You walk the corridors and see young officers clutching telegrams that begin with, "We regret to inform you, grief has become part of the uniform." He orders medals struck, paintings commissioned, posters printed overnight. The myth of Stalingrad must be built before the rubble cools. You help draft the proclamations, each word polished until it gleams with purpose. It's strange how easily language can bury the dead. Zhukov enters one evening, his boots still muddy from the front. He salutes, then waits for acknowledgement that never comes. Stalin thanks him, then says quietly, "Heroes grow bold. Bold men grow careless. Careless men forget who commands them." Zhukov nods once, as if accepting a sentence he already knew. Later that night, you find Zhukov alone in the hallway. He lights a cigarette and says, "Victory has a price." But in Moscow, the receipt is always missing. The smoke drifts upward, and neither of you speaks again. By spring, he's reassigned to the Urals. A quiet exile dressed up as promotion. You realize then that survival here is more dangerous than war. The snow melts. Trains roll west again. Cities once lost now rise from their ashes. He begins planning his next move, not on the battlefield, but on the chessboard of nations. He wants recognition, legitimacy. He wants the world to sit at his table. Summer 1943 brings the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank clash in history. The Red Army crushes the last German offensive in the east. You listen to reports of tigers burning in fields, of entire divisions swallowed by wheat and smoke. When the news reaches him, he allows himself a rare toast. To steel stronger than theirs, he says, and men harder than both. After Kursk, he stops referring to himself as a survivor. Now he calls himself the victor. He tells you, history respects strength, not innocence. You want to argue, but the words stay locked behind your teeth. The Kremlin is repaired in small ways. New paint, new carpets, new portraits replacing those of men who no longer exist. You keep your desk, your typewriter, and your silence. You tell yourself you're serving the nation, not the man. It's a lie you've perfected. By autumn, rumors of a meeting with the Western Allies begin to circulate. Tehran, they say, neutral ground. He approves, though he pretends indifference. You oversee preparations, translators, security officers, even floral arrangements. It feels like organizing a wedding between enemies. November 1943. You arrive in Tehran after days of train and convoy. The air smells of dust and citrus. The streets are lined with banners of nations that barely trust one another. For the first time, you see Stalin in daylight among equals. Roosevelt looks frail, Churchill theatrical. Stalin, in his simple tunic, seems almost modest, which is the point. He knows the power of contrast. He greets them as comrades, but his eyes never soften. At dinner, he jokes that Churchill drinks like a Russian, and Roosevelt smiles like one. Everyone laughs. You watch him turn humor into diplomacy, sarcasm into leverage. Every anecdote is a weapon hidden inside a story. When Churchill insists on a second front in France, Stalin taps ash into his plate and says, "Perhaps you fear German bullets more than Russian patience." Even Roosevelt chuckles, not realizing the insult. Later that night, you stand behind him as he studies a globe in his suite. He traces a finger along Europe's spine, stopping at Berlin. He murmurs, "Soon it will belong to us, though they will never admit it." It's in Tehran that something inside you begins to shift. For years you have watched him move nations like pawns, but here, under chandeliers and laughter, you realize he's no longer fighting Hitler. He's preparing for the world after him. And you are helping him do it. The next morning, he gives Roosevelt a gift, an ornate sword forged in Tula. When the American president admires it, Stalin says softly, "May it never need to be used between friends." The room laughs. You feel the chill in the joke that no one else hears. As the conference ends, he receives intelligence of a Nazi assassination plot. He chuckles when he reads it. "Even my enemies respect my importance." The train ride home is silent. He stares out the window for hours, watching the desert blur into snow. Finally he says, "The West believes they can share victory. They will learn what sharing means." Back in Moscow, you find the city draped in banners. Children sing of glory. Women sweep rubble into neat piles. Soldiers march on wooden legs. The war is turning, but something darker is beginning. You start noticing your reflection in polished floors, in the glass of his office doors. You see a man with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers and realize you no longer recognize him. You are not just a witness. You are a participant, and the thought terrifies you. The nights grow longer again. When you bring his tea, he is already awake, staring at the world map on the wall. The red lines have pushed west to the Vistula River. Soon, Berlin. He turns to you and says, "Do you feel it?" You ask, "What?" "The world changing shape," he says, "like iron bending in the forge." You nod, but what you feel isn't triumph, it's fatigue. The weight of years spent turning men into numbers. You know history is being written, but you can't shake the feeling that someday someone will read it and weep. Outside, the snow falls again over Moscow. Inside the Kremlin, the air smells of tobacco and destiny. He lights another pipe, leans back and says, "The tide has turned. Now we will decide what the world becomes." Outside, Persian music hums through the night, while inside, the map of Europe is rewritten. The war is almost won. That's what they tell us in the morning briefings. But in Moscow, nothing is ever truly over. Victory here is just another word for vigilance. I wake each day before dawn, the sound of telephones already ringing in the corridors. The Kremlin never sleeps anymore. Trains thunder east and west, carrying the bones of Europe in both directions. The walls shake with every new communique. He works longer hours than ever, aged, yes, but animated by obsession. Each time the Germans retreat, he grows quieter, not jubilant, reflective, as if victory itself were suspicious. When news reaches us that Leningrad has been liberated, he closes his eyes. For a long time, he says nothing. Then softly, almost to himself, "The city held longer than I expected. People are stronger than I deserve." By early 1944, the Red Army rolls through Ukraine. I read casualty reports that could fill volumes. Each figure is a life, and yet, in his ledger, each one is a measure of progress. He doesn't ask for totals anymore. He asks for ratios. How many Germans for each Russian? I tell him 5-1. He nods. That's fair. The party begins to rewrite its own story before the ink of war dries. Photographs are retouched. Old names vanish from the margins of speeches. Every victory is his. Every failure, someone else's betrayal. I help edit the newspapers now. Sometimes I change one name for another, erase one sentence, alter one date, and history changes shape before my eyes. The Allies begin their bombing of Germany in earnest. We hear of Dresden in flames, London still under sirens, Normandy waiting for the invasion. He listens to BBC dispatches through a captured receiver. He calls their courage admirable, their motives suspicious. Then he laughs and says, "They are finally dying for the cause I declared 5 years ago." That spring, he summons Beria, Molotov, and a handful of generals for a midnight council. I take notes by the dim light of a single bulb. The map of Europe lies before us like a patient on an operating table. His finger traces the front line from Warsaw to Budapest. "Here," he says, "we will stop the Germans and keep the West out." No one speaks. It's not a military plan anymore. It's a political border drawn before the fighting even ends. He begins sending commissars west with the army, not soldiers, but storytellers. They distribute pamphlets, teach local partisans the new vocabulary: liberation, people's democracy, brotherhood. It sounds noble. It feels rehearsed. Every word carries the weight of empire disguised as equality. In August, the Warsaw Uprising begins. The Poles rise against the Germans, expecting Soviet support. We halt the Red Army on the east bank of the Vistula. For weeks, we listen to their desperate radio calls. Stalin calls it a local misunderstanding. I hear the truth in his tone. Poland must suffer before it can be rebuilt obedient. By winter, the Allies land in France. The newspapers praise our united effort, but inside the Kremlin, suspicion grows like frost. He fears they'll reach Berlin first. Every morning, he asks for reconnaissance reports from the west. Every evening, he mutters, "They will try to steal the victory." The paranoia thickens with the smoke of our own triumph. When Yugoslavia liberates itself under Tito, he slams his fist on the table. No one liberates themselves without my permission. It's the first time I see him afraid. January 1945, we enter Poland. The roads are frozen, the fields mined. The soldiers drag their boots through snow that hides corpses beneath it. Somewhere near Krakow, they find Auschwitz. When the photographs reach the Kremlin, he studies them in silence. Then he says, "They accuse us of cruelty. Let them see what cruelty means." I want to speak, but words feel useless against what the eyes have seen. There are no instructions for grief in our manuals. We just file it, stamp it, archive it. By February, we are at Yalta. Roosevelt looks older, his eyes distant behind the smiles. Churchill smokes constantly, his fingers trembling slightly. Stalin, however, is serene. He has already decided what Europe will become. The others are merely signing his imagination into reality. I sit behind him as he speaks of free elections in Eastern Europe. He promises democracy with a smile that could melt glaciers. Churchill nods. Roosevelt coughs. The translators struggle to keep up. Every phrase is a mask worn by ambition. When we return to Moscow, he orders celebrations. Banners of victory hang over streets still in ruins. Children wave flags too heavy for their small arms. The parades stretch for miles, but he watches from his balcony alone. When the last tank passes, he turns to me and says, "Do you know what peace means?" I shake my head. He smiles thinly. It means more work. May 9th, 1945, Victory Day. The guns finally fall silent. The sky above Moscow glows red with fireworks. Crowds chant his name, their voices hoarse with relief. He raises a glass but does not drink. He whispers, "They cheer because they survived me as well as the Germans." The victory brings no rest. Within weeks, lists circulate, politicians to be replaced, writers to be silenced, generals to be reassigned. Zhukov returns to Moscow a hero, and within a month is exiled again. Too popular, Stalin says. Popularity breeds plots. I no longer keep count of his contradictions. He can weep for a soldier's sacrifice and order the execution of his widow the next day. He speaks of unity while dividing everyone into suspect and loyal. Every victory sharpens his fear. In the summer, we begin rebuilding Moscow. Marble is shipped from the Ural quarries, granite from Georgia. He approves every blueprint himself. He wants wide avenues so parades can march forever. He says, cities must be designed to remember who rules them. The Western press calls him a titan of the 20th century. Inside the Kremlin, we know better. Titans are lonely creatures. They hold up the world until it crushes them. Late that year, he asks me if I've ever been to Berlin. When I say no, he nods. Then you will. We will go see what's left of fascism. He doesn't mean sightseeing. He means dominion. In December, I travel with the delegation. Berlin is ash and silence. The Reichstag, a hollow shell, its flagpoles empty. He walks through the ruins without expression. Then he says quietly, "So, this is what their 1,000-year Reich looks like." He steps over a charred helmet and adds, "Let the next one last longer." When we return home, the victory banners are gone. The people smile less. Food remains scarce. The party begins another campaign, this one against cosmopolitanism, a new word for old fear. I'm told to monitor letters from abroad. Even gratitude has become suspicious. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the office glass. I look older than my years, ink-stained, tired, cautious. I used to believe I was recording history. Now, I think I've been erasing it. He stands by the window one evening, the city below glittering with cautious lights. He says, "Do you hear that?" I listen. There's nothing. No bombs, no sirens, he continues. That's when the real danger begins. The city rejoices below. Above, he lights another cigarette and whispers, "Now, the real war begins." Peace arrives like an echo. It repeats itself endlessly, but never sounds real. The guns are silent, but the air still carries their memory. Moscow stands, half rebuilt, half haunted. We are alive, yet every victory feels like a wound that never quite heals. I no longer write for the newspapers. Now I edit speeches, shape words into weapons again, only quieter ones. The war taught us how to fight. Peace is teaching us how to fear. The city glows each night with new lights, but the shadows are thicker than before. Posters rise everywhere, his face larger than life, his smile faintly paternal. Children are taught to thank him before God. Even in the churches, his portrait hangs beside the icons. He's no longer a man. He's an idea carved in granite. I walk past the river each morning on my way to the Kremlin. The reconstruction is endless. Women shovel bricks beside boys too young to shave. They sing as they work. It sounds like hope, but it's really exhaustion. We tell ourselves that the suffering brought something permanent. It must have, otherwise what was it for? Inside his office, the smell of tobacco never fades. The ashtrays overflow with the sediment of empire. He still reads every document aloud, even the ones written for show. Every sentence bends toward paranoia, every pause toward suspicion. He summons me often now, not for work, for company. The war took everyone he trusted, he says. You survived, so I keep you near. That must mean something. It feels like a compliment carved out of ice. Zhukov returns briefly in 1946, greeted like a god by the soldiers who owe him their lives. Crowds chant his name through the boulevards. Stalin watches the footage in silence. When it ends, he says quietly, "Heroes are useful until they start believing in themselves." A week later, Zhukov is reassigned again, this time to Odessa. He doesn't protest. He just vanishes, like everyone who shines too brightly. The cold peace begins that same year. We rebuild, but not for comfort, for control. Railways extend toward the west. Factories sprout in grey clusters. Our propaganda calls it rebirth. I know better. It's preparation. Meetings with Beria are constant now. He walks through the halls like a spider that knows every vibration in its web. He brings reports of subversive elements, poets, scientists, engineers accused of thought. Every name becomes a confession waiting to happen. We file them in grey folders that multiply like ghosts. By 1947, rationing returns. The people murmur. He blames black market parasites, then bourgeois remnants, then foreign influence. Each speech demands an enemy. Without one, he seems incomplete. That summer, he orders me to draft a congratulatory letter to the Americans for their Marshall Plan. When I bring him the draft, he laughs. Why should we thank them for chains made of dollars? He rips the letter in half, hands me a clean page and dictates, "Let them rebuild Europe. We will rebuild history." It's strange how the silence between nations sounds the same as peace, but beneath it, the air hums with tension. Berlin is split like a cracked mirror. Prague, Budapest, Warsaw, each city stitched together with invisible wire. We call it friendship. The West calls it the curtain. In 1948, I begin to notice the tremor in his hands. He drinks less now, sleeps even less than that. Some nights, he wanders the hallways alone. Guards pretend not to see him. He pauses at windows, staring out into the snow as if expecting someone. Once, I hear him whisper to the darkness, "Everyone betrays, even memory." The purges return quietly. No public trials this time. Just silence, an empty desk, a missing photograph, a key no longer needed. We erase names like brush strokes from wet paint. Sometimes I dream in redactions. Whole paragraphs vanish from my sleep. The arts flourish again, on the surface. Composers write symphonies of triumph. Painters create portraits of the father of nations. In private, they trade jokes so dark they could be confessions. I hear one poet whisper, under his gaze, we are all punctuation marks, pauses between executions. He disappears a week later. I start to keep 2 diaries, one real, one imaginary. The real one I burn page by page. The imaginary one I store in memory, hidden behind the mask I wear each day. If someone ever reads these thoughts, I want them to know we weren't all blind. We just couldn't see safely. In early 1949, news arrives that our scientists have detonated the Soviet atomic bomb, a perfect imitation of the American design, but in his eyes, it's creation itself. He reads the report twice, then sets it down gently, like a priest holding a relic. He smiles faintly. Now, he says, who is afraid? That night, fireworks burst over the river. People cheer. I don't. The glow in the sky looks too much like the flash of something irreversible. The future has been split open, and no one realizes the light is dangerous. When I return to my quarters, I find a new file on my desk, my own name stamped across the top. Inside, copies of my notes, letters, even old memos I had forgotten I'd written. There is no accusation, no signature, just evidence, waiting for interpretation. I close the file carefully and place it back in the drawer. I know better than to ask who sent it. Sometimes I imagine he's testing me, watching how I react. Maybe that's the point. Keep everyone uncertain. A nation in fear is a nation under control. I tell myself this as I drift to sleep, but it doesn't help. Even dreams are no longer private. By year's end he looks older, yet somehow more formidable. His hair gone silver, his eyes still volcanic. He speaks less in meetings, but when he does, the room still freezes. When he laughs, people take notes. When he coughs, they flinch. I no longer call him comrade when we're alone. Now it's just you. He notices, but doesn't correct me. Perhaps he likes it, a rare human echo among the endless hymns to his greatness. Sometimes he tells me stories of his youth in Georgia. They're never about friendship, only survival. He says, when you climb a mountain, you must kick away every stone that could trip you. Eventually, you look down and realize you've kicked away everyone. He pours himself a drink and adds, that's how you stay standing. I nod, but I wonder, how long before the mountain collapses too? The smoke clears, but the air feels no safer. The winter of 1950 comes early. The snow falls heavy. muffling the city like cotton in a wound. I wake before dawn each day, not from duty anymore, but habit. A reflex left over from years of waiting for his call. The phone seldom rings now. Even fear has grown tired. He's old, but refuses to be seen that way. Every public photograph is retouched, every wrinkle erased, every tremor disguised. He insists on working deep into the night, eyes rimmed red from smoke. Sometimes he reads old intelligence reports, even ones from the 1930s, as if history might confess something new. He doesn't trust the present. He prefers the past. It obeys him. I see him less often now. Meetings are shorter, the silence is longer. He still asks questions, but no longer listens for answers. Sometimes he just stares, as if searching my face for a betrayal I haven't yet committed. His gaze feels colder than ever, not because it burns, but because it no longer cares. Beria, now the real shadow of the Kremlin, brings new lists every week. Doctors, professors, writers, all accused of conspiring to kill him. The newspapers call it a Zionist medical plot. I call it madness written in official ink. The purge begins quietly. Men vanish from hospitals overnight. Prison wagons roll before sunrise, engines wrapped in blankets to hide their sound. Even those who denounce others disappear next. Loyalty has no expiration date. It just becomes evidence. He dictates memos filled with absurdities. He writes that Jewish doctors plan to poison the leadership, that British spies control the Kremlin air ducts, that even his tea is suspect. Each letter is signed in his trembling hand, each signature a verdict. I still type them, but something in me fractures each time. I tell myself I'm just a secretary, not a judge. But when the doors close at night, I can still hear the echo of my keystrokes, marching people to their deaths. The air inside the Kremlin thickens. No laughter, no music. Even the clocks seem cautious. He stops walking outside, claiming the cold makes his blood freeze. But the truth is simpler. He's afraid of being seen as mortal. One evening, Beria comes to me, pale and sweating. He whispers, he's losing his mind. The words hang in the air like gunpowder smoke. I don't reply. We've both seen what happens to men who diagnose him. Rumors spread that he plans a new wave of deportations. Trains already wait in the yards, their engines steaming in the frost. No one knows who the passengers will be. Perhaps all of us. Every suitcase in Moscow suddenly looks guilty. Sometimes I catch myself hoping he'll die, then I hate myself for it. For 20 years, I've lived in the gravity of his will. If he disappears, what becomes of the orbit that defined my life? The thought feels like blasphemy, and also like relief. By 1952, he trusts no one. His personal guards are rotated weekly. Food is tested 3 times before serving. He moves his sleeping quarters each night as if the walls themselves were plotting. The Politburo still applauds him in meetings, but their eyes are empty. Even Beria bows lower now, and for longer. I remember one late night that year. He called me into his office without explanation. The table was bare except for a single revolver. He asked, "Do you think I'm cruel?" The question felt like a mine disguised as a flower. I said, "No, comrade, only necessary." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "That's what the others said too, before I shot them." He laughed, a sound too thin to be human. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the revolver gleam in the lamplight, as if it were still waiting for an answer I hadn't given. The last winter arrives cruel and long. February 1953. The Kremlin air feels brittle, as though the walls themselves might shatter from one more whisper. He spends his evenings at Kuntsevo, his private dacha outside Moscow. I still deliver reports there. He reads them without comment, then falls silent for hours. On March 1st, I receive no summons. By noon, rumors ripple through the corridors. Something has happened at Kuntsevo. No one dare speak it aloud. That evening, a car arrives for me. Inside, Beria sits smoking furiously. He says nothing until we reach the gate. Then he exhales and murmurs, "He's down." I ask, "Dead?" He shakes his head. "Not yet." We enter the house. The smell of tobacco still lingers, mingled with something metallic. In the study, he lies on the carpet, eyes open, mouth slack, one hand clutching his chest. A puddle of spilled tea darkens the rug. The clock on the wall keeps ticking, indifferent. The guards stand frozen in the doorway, unsure whether to help or flee. No one moves. Hours pass. No doctor is called. No one wants to be first. What if he wakes and remembers? Fear, so long our master, now becomes our prison. By morning, his breathing has stopped. Outside, the snow continues to fall, as gentle as it was on the day of his birth. Someone closes his eyes, but they reopen slightly, as if unwilling to concede. For a moment, the silence in the room feels alive. The official announcement comes the next day. The city erupts in weeping, real and performed. Crowds flood Red Square, chanting his name through frozen tears. I watch from a balcony, the sound of mourning rolling like thunder. Part of me wants to join them. Part of me wants to scream. When they place his body in the coffin, his face looks smaller than I remember, almost fragile. The myth has finally outgrown the man. Beria leans close to me and whispers, "It's over." I want to believe him, but I know better. Nothing built on fear ever truly ends. It just changes shape. The funeral stretches for days. Millions file past his coffin. Some faint, some sob, some stare blankly, unsure how to exist without the shadow that shaped them. When my turn comes, I look down at him, the man who remade the world and unmade everyone who loved him. I whisper the only honest words I have left. History will not forgive you, but it will not forget you either. Afterward, I walk home through the snow. No guards follow. No curfew is announced. Moscow feels too quiet, as if the whole city is holding its breath. I reach my apartment, sit at the desk, and open a blank page. For the first time in 20 years, I type freely. Not for the party, not for him, for myself. I write what I remember, the faces, the names, the rooms without windows, the nights without sleep. Every sentence feels like an act of resurrection. Every truth feels dangerous, but I keep writing. When I finish, I place the pages in a small box. No one will ever read them. But I feel lighter. For the first time since 1939, I can breathe without permission. He once told me that death was just another form of loyalty. Now, as dawn creeps through the window, I realize he was wrong. Death is silence. Loyalty is remembering. When he dies, the silence feels heavier than his voice ever did. History likes its monsters simple. It prefers clean lines, bold shadows, and a single face to blame. But monsters don't rise alone. They are built. One compromise, one silence, one nod of obedience at a time. I once thought survival meant loyalty. That if I kept my head down, if I wrote what he asked, I might live long enough to see the end of fear. But the truth is crueler. Fear doesn't end. It simply changes hands. When Stalin died, 1 million people wept, and a few of us exhaled. The man was gone, but his shadow still filled every hallway, every story, every cautious whisper. We'd all become keepers of ghosts. Sometimes I still dream of him. He's sitting at his desk, maps spread like open wounds. He looks up and asks quietly, "What did you learn?" And I always answer the same way. That power is a mirror, and no one survives their own reflection. I wake to silence, the kind only Moscow winters know. The air feels cleaner now, though it carries his ghost like breath on glass. Perhaps memory itself is a form of justice. Slow, invisible, and patient enough to wait for sleep. You think you know Joseph Stalin, but history only showed you his mask. This was the face behind it.